Okay, today we're going to talk about some questions that I've been getting from people in regards to how their printer operates. I'm going to use my Creality. It has a SKR version 1.4 in it. It's not the turbo, but that's okay. They should act similar. And we're going to see how things work. So I've got 3 files that I'm going to pull down in just a second to show you. And those files involve their configuration. So I'm going to go to my downloads folder and clean it up here so it doesn't look like a mess. So I'm going to basically pull down what they posted on Discord to see what it looks like. And I'm going to unzip a good version of Marlin 2.0 from, I think it's 2.0.7.2, but I could be incorrect. I believe it's the latest release. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these files real quick here, and we'll see what we got. So let me just grab them real quick here. Okay, now that I have them, we're going to go over and we're going to take a look at them real quick. So I'm going to set my screen up so you can see what I'm doing. So on my screen for my desktop, I'll show you what we got here. So we have 3 files that they gave me. And we're going to compare them first to what the files are in the Marlin folder over here. So I'm going to go over here. Here's where the files are stored. So I'm going to go back for a second. I'm going to grab all three, copy them. Then I'm going to go back to that folder. I'm going to drop them right here. Now, platform.io.ini is in a different place. So I'm going to paste these right here. And first, what we're going to do is do a file comparison. This is a fresh copy of Marlin, so it's not my configuration. So we're going to see if we can sort out what's going on between them. So we have our config.h and our config. Over here. So I'm going to go over to SVN and do a diff. And we'll see what we got here. So first, we have the person's thing that they have set up here. This is obviously not modified because it's configuration.h. So it's a fresh copy. And it looks like they're using a touchscreen display and they're using the SKR. Now they're using Turbo, which you can see right here. I am not, so we're gonna have to make a mod there. Custom machine name, I'm gonna leave alone. I'm gonna scroll through and see if there's any other differences that we can pick out real quick. So they have a heat bed. They have a difference in temperatures, as you can see. Looks like they did some calibration for their PIDs. And a couple of other things. But I think the main focus that we're going to have to pick on for this is that we want to check first, see what's going on with the steppers. Now, I've done a couple of videos on how to set up the steppers. Some of the information may be not totally correct. When I said set it for 100, that may not be correct due to the type of steppers because the TMCs have changed the game. We're going to start with their current configuration and see what it looks like for this part. So I'm just going to copy this because my configuration is slightly different. And we'll also look at their advanced configuration in a second. Obviously, I'm not using the classic jerk where they are. So we're going to start with the simple stuff first to see what's going on, and then go from there. So I'm going to go over to VS Code where my configuration is, and let you see that. So inside VS Code, the only thing I'm going to change right now is the config. So I'm going to search on the A4988 so you can see what my steppers are. And as you can see, I have TMC 2208s. And down here, I have my configuration that I've set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out for a second. And I'm going to paste their configuration right here. And then I'm going to go over to their advanced configuration and do the same. So let's just double check here. I'm going to scroll back up and look at their configuration for that. So I'll show you what I'm looking at. So right here, you can see that I haven't changed anything with the define max limits yet. I'm just going to leave that alone. And I'm going to close out of this for just a second. And I'm going to do compare on the advanced configuration. And this is with a default copy of Marlin. So what we're interested in is not really what we're seeing in the advanced config for our auto fan, because he's running an automated fan, it looks like. And he's got different settings for the actual temperature. We're interested in where it says the actual steppers. So we want to emulate what they're doing. So I'm going to look at this real quick. And I'm actually going to show you what happens on my printer before I actually make the moves. But it looks like there might be some stuff going on with baby stepping. I'm not doing anything with that currently. Now if we scroll down a little bit further, hopefully we'll get to the section where they talk about the actual stepping right here. And notice how he's set to 64 and the default is 16. So we're going to search first on Xcurrent over here in our version of VS Code. So I'm going to go to the Advanced tab for a second, and I'm going to search on Xcurrent for my configuration. Apparently there's a lot of Xcurrents. There we go. So mine's set to 256. So I'm gonna comment this out and I'm gonna paste in his configuration right here. And so now you can see what two configurations are. So now I'm going to go over to the actual printer for a second and show you what's going on there. So what I have to do is double check my setup here. Okay. So I'm going to power it on. I've been working on the BL Touch, so that's why you're seeing that cord off in the distance. So I'm just going to do a normal move. So I'm going to go into Pronterface and show you this. You just get it set up here so you can see it. Okay, so I'm going to connect to the printer. I'm going to home it for the x-axis. Then I'm going to move over 100. And I'm going to home it again. And I'm going to do the same with the Y for the moment. I'm going to home it. And then I'm going to move it 100. And home it again. You can see it's pretty quiet. Except for the fan noise probably next to the microphone. So let me move the mic over here so it's not as bad, hopefully. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to disconnect from the actual printer. And I'm going to go back over to VS Code and I'm going to load that configuration. So just those two things changed. And so I'm going to do the upload button. Let me see if you can see what I'm doing, which you can't. Okay. So I'm going to go to the upload button and click it. Now hopefully if all goes well, it'll load it on the printer and we'll see what's going on. And while that's going on, I'm going to check on the chat, see what you have to say. Apparently it's kind of quiet in the chat today. That's okay. But let me know if you can hear the sound of my voice. And now that's finished compiling, we're gonna power cycle the printer. So I'm gonna turn it off. Then I'm gonna turn it back on. I'm gonna go back over to Pronterface. I'm gonna connect to the printer. And I'm gonna first home or move it 100. Or 10 first to be safe. See how it's jumping? So there's something going on there. Now I'm going to home it. And that's a little bit of power there. So there's something going on that's causing it to be a little bit jumpy. Let's try the y-axis. We'll move it 100 or 10. And then we'll home it. Not so bad on the Y. So the question is, why is it so jumpy? I probably have some settings that are set for the BL Touch, so it might be a little bit weird. But as you can see, that's a little bit powerful. I'm doing a bump offset, so that might be affecting it. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look in VS Code if we can fix this. So for VS Code, when we're inside there, first thing we're going to start with is, because we're set to a current of 64, we're going to start with the basics. So I'm going to go back to 16 for microstepping. Then I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to change this just to 80. And then I'm going to reload it after I disconnect from Pronterface. So I just disconnected, so I'm going to click the upload button. And because I have the jumper in the certain position right now where it can only work off of power on the printer, which is also good for the steppers, I have to leave that jumper in that position versus USB. So this should take a second. Let me check on the chat again. Apparently it's a little quiet in there today. So I'm going to go back into VS Code. And it looks like it completed, so I'm going to power cycle the printer. So I'll move back over to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to power cycle. I'm going to power it back on. And then I'm just going to try the x-axis because that's what we're working with. So I'm going to go into Pronterface. And I'm going to connect to the printer. I'm going to home the z-axis, or excuse me, the x-axis. Wow, that's new. I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to power off the system for a second. Power it back on. So that didn't work. And it seemed kind of bad what was occurring. So I'm going to go back over here and see what we can do about that. So in VS Code, let's see what we can figure out. I may have some dependent settings that may be why we're having issues, but so we have it set to 80, and then we have the config for the x-axis set to 16. So I'm going to crank that up to 64 like it was. And because this is 80, I'm going to go and change this to first 160, which is 32 on the baby stepping on the other side. Then I have to change it to 320. And I'll upload that again. And hopefully we'll be able to sort out what's going on here. But there may be other settings that we'll have to play with. Okay, it's almost done compiling. Now let's power cycle the printer again. I'll move over to where you can see that going on. And then I'll move over to Pronterface so you can see what's occurring there. So I'm going to connect. And I'm going to try and home again. So it homed kind of quick. So let's move it out 10. And it doesn't want to move. That's awesome. So I'll disconnect, reconnect. Doesn't want to move. So let's go back and try it again. I think there's something going on where I'm mismatched, but I don't know. So I'm going to transition back over here, and I'll just move it back to my default settings just to see what's going on. So here's my current setting. 1280, 1280, 893. That's an approximation. I haven't cal'd the printer yet. And then over here, I'm going to change this away and bring it back to 256. That's the max. And I'm gonna load that back up, and I'll make sure I'm disconnected from the printer. Yeah, that's a nice sound. It wakes you up in the morning, I guess. Right now I'm checking to see if the printer's okay, so that's one of the reasons I moved it back. So let's see what's going on with this. So it looks like the compile's completed, so I'll bring you back over to the workbench so you can see what's going on. In a power cycle, bring it back up. Then I'm going to go over to Pronterface. I'm then going to connect the printer. I'm going to move it 10. Seems to be moving okay. Then I'll home it. That seems fine. Now let's try 100. That's close to 100, but a little bit too far, but that's okay. We'll home it. So there's something weird going on with the settings in Marlin, I think. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it seems like the lower value settings may have an issue. The other thing is that I have it configured right now for the BL Touch, so I've been kind of busy with that I may have changed a lot of settings, but we can do it from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open a different version of Marlin as soon as I get to VS Code, and we'll see if we can troubleshoot it. So inside here, I'm actually just going to close my project. So I'm closing the folder. I'm going to map to the folder for the printer. This is going to be a little bit iterative for a setup, so this might take a second. So I have to go to the Downloads folder, and then I have to go to my Marlin folder, and then I'm going to click Open. Now inside here right now, it looks like I've got the 3 files that originally came with it that he's using. I'm going to kind of ignore these initially just to see what's going on. So first things first, figure out what your actual board type is. So I'm going to go to Core, Boards, do a search on SKR. I'm going to copy my board type, which is here. Obviously the board type he's using is down here. It's just a slight difference in processor speed. So I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to go to Marlin config.h. I'm going to do a search on motherboard. I'm going to paste it over the ramps. I'm actually going to make the changes for first the connection, which is -1. Then I have to uncomment this so I can use the LCD. So I'm going to change this to 0, and I'm actually going to change the speed, but it's not relevant in this case. But in order to use my LED, or excuse me, my touchscreen LCD, it defaults at 115/200, and that's the only reason I want to set it. But in this case, I'm really not going to worry about that, so I'm going to change it back, because we can change it on the LCD if we really need to do it for the touchscreen. So that's the first part. Next part is steppers. So we have to go to the A4988. This is a quick way for me to search for it. I'm going to be using the TMC 2208, so I'm going to copy that, paste it here, 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 and then I'm going to do E0. I'm going to remove the comments because we're no longer default. And that'll set up the steppers. Now down here, we have our steppers that we normally work with. They're set to 80. So we're going to see what happens. This is a little high. This should probably be around 400. That's just a guess. And this should be around 100. I'd show you all the algorithms to do the actual computation, but we're just going to do that as a default to begin with. Then I'm going to go over to the configuration advanced, do a search on 800. I'm going to change this to 750. That's the X current. Then I'm going to do the Y current, which is going to be 750 as well. And then the Z, which is right here. And then finally E0. So I have to scroll a little bit. There it is. So 750. All I'm doing to begin with, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to press the upload button, hopefully. I might have an issue here. Looks like I'm not able to see the build because I might be doing something wrong. So let's see what we got here. Let's try Marlin. It says I've got 2 projects open. So I'm going to close this down for a second. We'll redo this in 2 seconds. So I'm going to close the folder. I'm not going to save because I can reset this pretty quick. I need to go over to my downloads folder because I've got something in conflict. So I'll pull that up so you can see what's going on. So my downloads folder, inside here, I've got files already in here. So I'm going to first delete those. They're not relevant. I'm actually going to delete this whole folder because I don't think it's correct. And apparently it's not allowing me to delete the folder because it's open someplace else. So let me check around and see what I have open. I might have 2. Nope. Go back and try it again. Oh, I know what's going on. I have this file open probably here. And I probably have it open in another software, so I'm just double checking. Now I'll try and delete it. Hopefully. Okay, it doesn't want to delete, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to right click on the latest download and we're going to extract it again. And when we extract this, it's going to have a second name, or at least I hope it does. And we'll see if this fixes the problem. This might take a moment. Apparently my computer's moving a little slow, or it's copying over the current one that we have. I'll check on the chat for a second and see what's going on. Yeah, it's copying over the file. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to extract all. I'm going to rename this Marlin 2 and extract it as a separate folder. That way we don't have to worry about the issue. And then when that extracts, we'll go back to VS Code and we'll make the changes. Hopefully the folders will be okay and I didn't zip something in there by accident. But we can double check that. So their files are normal. So this should be almost unzipped. So let's go back over to VS Code and make those changes real quick. So in VS Code, we're going to go to the Explorer. We're going to click on Open Folder. Actually, you can't see that very well, so I'll move it so you can see it better. You're going to open a folder. You're then going to go to your downloads. We're going to open up the second one over here twice, and then we're going to do select folder. This should resolve the issue that we were seeing, hopefully. And then I'll do the config very quickly, I hope. So I'll go to the source, the core, boards.h. I'll search on SKR. I'll copy that. I'll close out of this and go to configuration.h, search on motherboard. I'll paste it right here. I'll change this to -1 and this one to 0. And then I'll remove the comment to make it usable. Then I'll search on the A4988. I'll copy the stepper type that I have. I'll paste it here, 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 and here. Then I'll remove the comments. And then I'll go over and change the steppers. So 80, 80, and I'll change this to 400. And this one to 100. These are going to be a little bit large. We can go through a configuration algorithm for it later. But let's go over the advanced configuration, search on 800. Probably have to go down a couple. And change this to 750. 750. 750 and 750. So that's all we've done for changes. The actual platform I/O, we know that it's an LPC 1768, not 9, because it's not a turbo. And then we're going to upload it to the printer. Now there's going to be issues. I'm letting you know that in advance, and that has to do with how things move. They may move in the wrong direction, so we'll sort that out in a second. So I'm moving most of my stuff to where it should be. Now I have a compiler error. Normally for a compiler error, you go to the very first thing that you're looking at, and it's saying something about EEPROM. So I'm going to actually clean the build, and then I'm going to do it again, and hopefully this will clear the issue, because I was working with EEPROM earlier, so it's probably buffered in the .pio folder that I was working with, and somehow it's actually able to point at it in a different directory or something, but I don't know, it might be cached. So now that we got that done, we're going to go back over to the printer and power cycle it. So I'll show you what I'm going to do. So power it down, power it up. Now that it's powered up, I'm going to go over to Pronterface, and we're going to see issues right away, but we'll see what those are. So I'm going to keep my hand on the power switch when I do this, because we're going to have some messy stuff to deal with. So I'm going to first connect to it. So I'm online. Now I'm going to try and move just a millimeter to see which direction the actual x-axis moves in. So it's moving backwards when I want to move forwards. Now let's try and home. If it goes in the opposite direction, I have my hand on the power switch. So it's moving the opposite direction. We can fix that real quick. So I'm going to go back over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, we need to invert the access. So we're going to search on invert in config.h. And the one that we're looking for, I always get this backwards, is this one, which is now going to be true. We're going to power the printer back up and disconnect in Pronterface just to keep it from trying to move still. So you obviously can't see that part, so I'm just going to apply power. So when it comes back up and I hear a ding, I'm going to do the upload. I'm going to click that. And I'm going to check on the chat while that's going on. VS Code is actually not as bad as people think. Essentially, it's a IDE or integrated developer environment. All you have to know is Control F for search, and then for the actual Marlin code, I've been working with it for, what is it, 4 years? So to me, makes logical sense, but I have a programming background, so obviously I have a little bit of knowledge that took a couple of years to learn in high school and college, so but right now I'm trying to show you guys what to do, so it's not as overwhelming as you think. And I'm trying to relate it in an easily digestible way to you. So let me go back over to the workbench for a second. And I also got to double check on the chat. And let's see what we got here. The actual printer it rebooted fine. I'm actually going to move this to the center. And I'm going to connect to the printer again in Pronterface. Inside Pronterface, I'm going to click connect. Inside here, I'm not going to do this just yet, but I'm going to advance this a little to see what's going on. It's now going in the right direction. Now I'm going to try and home with my hand on the power again. So it's moving in the wrong direction again, so I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to power it up. Now the reason it's moving in the wrong direction has to do with the setting in VS Code. So we're going to go to VS Code. It thinks that the actual homing direction is someplace else. So what we need to do is figure that out. So there's a setting down here for homing direction. So we're going to take the -1 and change it to a 1. And then we're going to upload again. And we have another issue, which is going to make it confusing. So there's a sanity check issue because it thinks that we're moving towards the other plug. That's awesome. So I'm going to undo this change. And I'm going to see what's going on for direction. Now we've already inverted the direction, and I already know the answer to this problem because I've worked with it before, but it says that we can do something here too. I don't want to do that just yet. But now I got to look around because this gets confusing quick. What's occurring is it thinks that the actual homing direction for the axis is the other way. And so this should technically move not towards the max, but the opposite direction. So there's a couple of different solutions where you can move your end stops, but I don't want to do that. So I'm going to cheat and actually look up the answer just to save time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this file and another file and take a look. But for some reason it shouldn't go to the max. That's what's confusing to me. And it is talking about something with SPI that makes absolutely no sense. Because we're not using SPI for anything that I know of. So let's go over here. And it's talking about something with serial. That makes absolutely no sense for a debug issue. But needless to say, the issue is being caused by that setting change. So I'm just going to double check it for a second here. So that's fine. So let's go back over here. This is actually what's causing us to go in the wrong direction right now, even though it's the right direction. So what we need to do is find a way to invert the axis for homing. So that would normally be one option that I'd use. Now I can also move the end stop, so I'm gonna cheat and just pull up my version. So I'll show you what I'm doing, because I've already done this before, and I'm just trying to save time. So I'm gonna go over to my desktop. Here's my folder for this. Hang on, I'll show you what I'm doing in a second. I'm just gonna be copying out a file. I just have to find the file. Let's see. Apparently my computer wants to do something other than what I want to do. There we go. So these files might be mine, or there might be somebody's from yesterday's. But I'm going to copy them into this directory. I'll show you what I'm doing. So I have some unchanged files. Just to double check if there's a change in here, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to search on BL Touch just to make sure it's the one that's unchanged. This is not the unchanged one, the other one's a changed one. So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to copy both of these and then paste them again, and that way I'll have a second copy, hopefully. And I'll copy out these, and then I'll go back to my downloads folder, the second Marlin, go inside here and paste. And so to cheat, I'm gonna click on here and here, and I'm gonna do a file compare to see what the difference is. So inside here, obviously I have multiple extruders on this printer. I'm doing a single nozzle. That shouldn't be relevant. I'm gonna scroll down. I still haven't set up the bed sensor, obviously. Thermal runaway for a chamber. I obviously don't have a chamber, so we're not gonna worry about that. But it looks like for the Z-Min I'm doing something, but that doesn't mean anything at the moment. Then obviously my steps are not an issue. S-curve is something different. That doesn't have anything to do with it. BL Touch doesn't have anything to do with it. Probing margin, that's why you're probably seeing a strange offset when I was homing. But what we're looking for is actually having to do with the steppers. This is me playing around with actual leveling. I'm working on UBL. The other ones seem to work funny, so I might only talk about UBL at this point when I do a tutorial on that. Z-Safe homing is no relevance. EEPROM is used for BL Touch, so that's why I have it in there. Obviously I'm not doing anything with my character set at the moment. So what I'm trying to find is the actual stepper motion, and apparently I'm not seeing it. So let's go back up, and I'm going to search on invert. So we're not working with the solenoid. So we already went through that. I'm just wondering if I scrolled right through it. That's super odd. Here it is. So I set it to true. I didn't make any changes here. So that's really weird. Now this is for the actual BL Touch, so that's not relevant. Bed size isn't really relevant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the printer and power it back on and just see if that was something that was only momentary. But I'm looking at my minimum end stop setting right here, and it looks like I may have made a change here for this. So we could look for that, but that has to do with, I believe, bed leveling. But let's give it a try. Maybe this is the fix that we're looking for. So I'm going to copy this part right here. And this probably won't solve the problem, but let's see what happens. So inside VS Code, I think we're already on it, but let's do a search. And I'm going to knock this out. And then let's try an actual build. This is going to be kind of weird what I'm doing, so I have a funny feeling that this won't fix anything. A lot of these changes that I made have to do with the BL Touch, so I'm slightly confused as to what's going on. But what we're trying to do is actually get the axis to move the right way. And the only other way to do that is to switch it to Xmax, and I don't want to do that just yet because I don't think it's necessary. So now that that's complete, I'm going to power cycle again. Power that back on. Then I'm going to go over to Pronterface, and hopefully this won't be a total disaster, but we'll see. I'll connect. I'll move a little just to see what's going on. So it's moving, so I'm going to try homing again. So that appears to have fixed it. So we know that works. So now let's increase or do the y-axis as well and see what goes on there. This might be the exact same issue. So I'm going to move this into where the center is. And on the power, I'm going to move it a little. Moving. Now I'm going to try and home. If it goes the wrong direction, I'll power it off. And that works. So we're all set there. So X and Y are all set for that motion on the printer. So now let's increase the actual stepping values. So I'm going to go back to VS Code and see if I can bring this back in alignment. So inside VS Code, I'll check on the chat in 2 seconds, but first I want to go back and set these settings. So I'm going to scroll to the top, and my shortcut is to search on A4988 or 4988. That brings me in the neighborhood of where I want to be over here. So I'm going to double this to 160, then double it again to 320. So these are proportional. So if I do 160 here, in the advanced configuration, I have to set. So first, 80 would associate with 16. If I want to go to 32, that would be the same sizing as 160. Now, if I go to 320, that means that I have to go to 64 here. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing for the Y, just for those two axes, so you can see what's going on. So 64. And I'm going to change the value to match, so 320. And then we're going to reload after I disconnect from Pronterface. So let me click on that. And I'll check on the chat real quick. Yeah, the EEPROM I think gets overwritten if you change it. Meaning in the firmware. I think there was something buffered in memory that was causing an issue inside the IDE. So now that we have that loaded, I'm going to go back over to the workbench and we'll check to see if this works correctly this time. Because this is where we were about 20 minutes ago. So I'm going to power that off, power it back on, and I'll go over to Pronterface. And inside Pronterface, I'm going to connect to the printer. I'm going to move this axis up 100. And I'm going to move this approximately 100. They're obviously not caled. Now I'm going to home. So there appears to be no alarm at the moment. So let's home the y-axis. So it looks like those are all good. So I'm going to move them back to their center positions. And now I'm going to crank it way up so that you can actually see that it's moving as it should. So I'll go over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, I'm going to change this to 64 or 640, pardon me. And I'm going to go over to the advanced. And I have to move this proportionally as well. So this would be 128. And to go up to 256, we can just go back and say 256. And proportionally, we have to move this one to 1280. So I'm going to do that for both X and Y. So I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste it right here. And then I'll do the same for the y-axis, which is 256. And then I'm going to upload again. So I'll make sure I'm disconnected from Pronterface while I'm doing that. And then I'll check on the chat real quick. Yeah, it may not erase the EEPROM, but we can find that out. We can also overwrite the EEPROM. There's commands for it. It's like M500 and in that range for G codes where you can reset the EEPROM if you really wanted to some default. But let me go over to the workbench so I can power cycle this again. Power it back on. Then I want to go over to Pronterface. Inside Pronterface, I'm going to connect again. And I'm going to home the access. And then I'm going to move it out 100. And notice how it moves exactly the same. It's just the increments of the steps have increased. You may not be able to see that, obviously, how the software is doing it, but there's more increments in the steps. That's why when I double those values, they have to stay proportional. So the y-axis is similar, but right now I don't have it tuned, so it's going to move all over the place. So I'm going to avoid showing you that because I don't want to tear off my BL Touch by accident. But somebody had another question earlier in the week that I haven't had a chance to actually cover, but I'll show you that right now. So I'm going to grab a board and I'll move over to the workbench so you can see what I'm talking about here. So here's the turbo. Right now it's got a stepper in it, so I'll pull that out. Obviously it's set for UART, as you can see right here. But the question that they had to do with when I take the actual config and I use -1 for the first serial port. So I'm going to show you what happens. So I may break my board on this, but I doubt it. So I'm going to connect to this board with the USB. Now obviously nothing's happening because it's set to direct power. So I'm going to move this over temporarily. Remember, when you're using like TMC steppers, you have to move that over. This will power the board for the moment. Now, obviously, I don't know what the board setting is at the moment, so I'm going to go over to my desktop so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to pull up Device Manager. And inside Device Manager, we might have a different COM port. So it's 13 in this case. So over here, I'm going to move that to 13 for the COM port, and then I'm going to do a disconnect, reconnect. Now it says online down here. So we know it works. So we could load the same firmware on this, but I don't want to do that. So what I want to show you is what's going to occur if I change it and how to fix it. So I'm going to go over to VS Code, and inside VS Code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search on config.h. I'm going to move to the top, and the search is for motherboard. That just gets me in the neighborhood. And up here, instead of 1, we're going to do 0. So I'm going to comment this out because this is going to cause an error. And that's just for your LED or TFT, excuse me. So I'm going to change that to 0, and then I'm going to upload this to the board again. So this should upload to the board, and I'll show you what that looks like. Let me just pull this over here. So it'll populate in here in a second. Okay, now that it's populated, we know it's loaded, so we're going to power cycle the board by doing this. I'll show you. I'm going to disconnect the power, then I'm going to reconnect the power. So it looks like it sounded like it loaded, and it came up. So originally, when I was doing this years ago, it disconnected. So let's check to see if there's actually a COM port in here. So we still have the COM port, so my thinking on that is probably incorrect. Let's double check this on the desktop so you can see what I'm talking about. So on the desktop, I brought up the COM port, and we still have the COM port, which is good. So I'm going to connect or disconnect, then reconnect. So at the moment, it's not connecting. Let's try connect again, and it's still not connecting. So it does show up as a USB device, but we can't seem to connect to it for some reason. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and change it to -1 and see what happens. So I'm going to go over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, I'm going to change this back to a -1, and then I'm going to upload that again. Now, if this works correctly, we should be able to see what's going on. So let's see if there's a drive. There is a drive. Let's see if it copies over. It copied over. Let's go back to the workbench. Discovering the actual reason why this was, I kind of forget because some of these details aren't super big to me. After I learn them, I just ignore them. But now it'll power back up, and we'll check to see if it connects. So I'm going to go back over to Pronterface. And I'm going to try and connect to the board again. So now it says online. So that negative number being -1 allows you to connect that way. I did discover another mistake that I did make, and that the drive size I thought had to be 120 megabits. Turns out you can go a lot larger. I'm looking for the drive on my desk because I tested this the other day. Let me see if it's in here. Hang on a second. I've got a couple of drives that I keep in the on the desk or around the desk, so I don't know exactly where I put them. So let me see if I can see it. Well, I can't see it at the moment, but I can tell you the drive is significantly larger. I think it's upwards of 8 gigs I've been able to do so far. I'm ordering another drive to test it, but apparently the 128 megabit drives don't always seem reliable. So that's one of the reasons that I checked it. So let me see if I have any questions about stuff to do today. So let's see. Yeah, it may crash in the bed 3D Wildcat, but you never know for sure. At the moment, I've been somewhat fortunate because I keep my hand on the power. But I can always reload or even look at the EEPROM. Hang on a second while I bring the camera back on. So let's take a look at the EEPROM and see what's going on. Maybe we can see the settings. Let me see where I am here. So I'm going to go over to a browser. And I'm going to look up the actual EEPROM settings because we might be able to decipher something from them. So in the browser, I'm going to go to Marlin Firmware. Inside Marlin Firmware, I'm going to go to Tools or Help, G-Codes, All Documents. I'm going to search on M500. And so we have Save Settings, Restore Settings, Factory Reset Settings, Report Settings. Then we have Validate EEPROM Content. So let's do the M504. So if you go over to Pronterface, we're already connected to the board. So what was that, M504? If I can type correctly. Let's see what we get. So unknown command. Now the reason that we're getting unknown command in this case is because we disabled EEPROM by loading a different firmware where it wasn't enabled, and I'll show you how to fix that. So if you go to VS Code, inside VS Code, you're going to search on EEPROM, and hopefully it will bring us to the one of the 14 entries. This is the one we're looking for. This is rewritable memory or RAM. So let's upload this to the board and see if we can get a view into what the configuration is. Now this is a different board, so obviously the EEPROM configuration is different. But now we'll get a viewable one. So you may be correct that there's 2 different boards. So let's see what we got here. So if I go over to the workbench, I disconnect, then reconnect. Then I go to Pronterface. Have to disconnect, reconnect here, and then do the command. So it's saying very little, at least for this, but we can do other commands. I think what was it, M503? Let's check in the browser here. So inside the browser, we have commands for report settings. That's M503. Let's see what we get for that. Now the settings obviously are different. So those are our current settings right here. So that's what's being stored in EEPROM allegedly. On the ramps, this loads by default. Every other board doesn't. I don't know why that is, other than it's a programming thing, but it's echoing out the contents of the EEPROM to the end user. So there's not a lot that you can decipher from this, but these go to different commands, like the M92 is a G code. Obviously that's a G code, but to know them off the top of my head, I don't know, but I can tell you that we're in millimeters, not inches. So does anybody have any questions today? Yeah, we can reset the EEPROM by doing M500 or 501. It's one of those two. So that says that the settings are stored. Let me go back and look at the actual web browser right here. It's been a while and I don't memorize all these anymore. So we can do a factory reset at M502, we can restore settings at 501, and we can save settings at M500. So here's the example of the commands. The reset, and then there's M500. Usually, I think the best thing this is used for is actually bed leveling. But let's see what happens. We're probably not going to see very much of a change only because of this board's condition. So let me see what we can do here. We'll do M502. And it says hard-coded default settings loaded. See what M503 says. Now the settings look pretty much the same. I can actually go back and cut them out to look at them, but that's only because we've not really changed much. But if we want to save these settings, we can do M500. Those settings are stored. The CRC is actually cyclical redundancy check. So just a little bit of useless information for people that want to learn something about it. It's a way to check for errors. Kind of like, well, Hamming code, but I don't think you guys know what that is. But you have a bit string. There's a bit at the end that says, is it positive or negative? And then if your expectation is it's positive or negative, then there's an algorithm you can run on it to fix the data that was transmitted, but it's not really used anymore, so nobody knows what I'm talking about. This is like 1980s technology, so anyways. That's great. Obviously I don't fix other people's printers. I just try and help them out. Obviously all my information is not perfect 3D Wildcat, but I am willing to learn, so. I don't have the board yet. The MKS Robin Nano version 3 I haven't gotten from MakerBase. They sent me the MKS version 2, and they also sent me, I'm sorry, the Robin Nano 2 and the MKS S-Gen version 2. Yeah, I'm talking about code parity. It's been forever and a day that I've had to talk about it, so I mean, everything's basically run through IP now, so that's some of the information. Obviously, I'm not an expert on any of these categories, but Hamming code was something that we studied for K-maps, and I can't even remember K-maps anymore, but it's a way to simplify equations in Boolean algebra or something. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting off on a sidetrack there. But the Nano board, hopefully I'll get my hands on one. Maybe they'll send me one again, but we'll have to see how they feel about that. They do want me to do a tutorial on how to load one of their boards on a Creality. So I might ask them to send one now that I have a Creality as a test machine. And maybe I can show you that board as well. That depends on them. So I'm probably going to have to wrap it up early today because I got some errands to run. Unfortunately, tonight we're not going to be doing the Ender 5 upgrade. We're going to have to save it till, I guess, next Friday. It has to do with getting and acquiring materials to do the actual fix. Unfortunately, our schedules only mesh on Friday night because he's in Australia and I'm in the United States. So we have to pick a time that we're both awake. So I'll be doing that probably Friday night again. And for those that don't know, I have a Twitch account where I'm trying to build that up. And for those that have been doing super chats, thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. And as always, take care and be safe. And if you have questions, my Discord link is in the description of the video. So everybody take care and have a nice day. And I'll talk to you on Monday.